Hello and welcome to Split in Croatia for this new edition of Europe District on France 24. With a population of 200,000, Split is Croatia's second largest city, set on the turquoise waters of the Adriatic Sea and surrounded by mountains. The old centre of Split is one of the most charming places in the region. Coming up in this programme, we'll talk, of course, about the European Union. In June, Croatia got the green light from Brussels to join the European club. This is a turning point for this former Yugoslav nation of 4.4 million, which should become the 28th member by July 2013. Now, what do Croatians think about the prospect of joining the European Union? We'll bring you a special series of reports. We'll also travel to the capital, Zagreb, to talk to the president. And last but not least, we'll go to Rijeka, a buzzing port with an avant-garde flair. But first, before it officially joins the European Union, Croatia will have to hold a referendum on the question. With Euroscepticism rising over the years, the government has launched a campaign to try and convince the population that joining the EU will indeed be a good idea. Let's watch our first report brought to us by our correspondent Valérie Labonne.
It may have convinced the EU that it's ready for membership, but now Croatia's government must assure the Croatian people that it's a good idea. And it's pulling out all the stops. A massive advertising campaign is running until the end of July, involving 90 radio stations and 20 television channels. Using 50 adverts over 45 days with a budget of €2 million, the campaign hopes to dispel the myths surrounding Croatia's accession.
They know a bit about what's going on, but much of the information fed to them was biased, and people only heard one side of the story. They have their concerns, but I think this campaign has promoted a line that the reality will be different from what's been presented to them.
In 2007, a telephone line was set up to field any questions, and there were plenty of them, 200,000 to be exact, like this one by Vedrana.
Once we join, will we be under the dictatorship of Brussels?
Vedrana volunteered to take part in the commercial to assure her compatriots that Croatia's entry into the EU is the right step.
I can't say that joining Europe will fundamentally change my life, but I think it will allow me to increase my skills, get more training, and have more career opportunities.
Most questions centre on sovereignty and Croatia's national identity. Some on more minor issues, including the possible threat to Croatia's craft makers and local brandy production lines. Judging by the country's recent history, it's easy to understand people's concerns.
For a country that has only enjoyed independence for 20 years, the question arises, having regained independence, is it now a good time to join the European Union?
Since the arrival of Prime Minister Jadranka Kosor in 2009, joining the EU has been the #1 objective of Croatia's government. After Slovenia and its speedy entry in 2004, Croatia was the first country of the former Yugoslavia to seal membership negotiations with the EU. But stricter conditions of accession compared with the latest EU newcomers, a 6-year wait and the crisis of the euro have fueled Euroscepticism. Some fear the 4.4 million Croatians will be swallowed up by Europe's population of 500 million. The shipyard workers at Rijeka already share a growing resentment of Brussels.
Behind me you see a totally abandoned production line. Before we used to work around the clock. All of this is the result of contracts we lost because of the European Commission's decisions.
One of the decisions was to force Croatia to restructure its industries. In line with competition rules, the country must decrease grants to public enterprises, a tough blow for an industry already hit by the economic crisis. 4 out of the country's 5 construction sites are lumbered with a total debt of €2 billion. To preserve its public finances, the Croatian government has opted for privatisation.
We are aware of the fact that in the future we will not be able to subsidize our shipyards as we did in the past. So we invested a lot of money in our shipyards. Some of this money gone. Our taxpayers paid for Croatian shipyards, but we do not want to repeat this.
Croatia's construction industry is the country's largest sector, second only to tourism. Europe wants it to modernise quickly, and as a result, sites need to reduce their production capacity and the number of staff while improving their productivity. But for management, the real pressure isn't so much from Europe, but rather Asian competition.
The government stay behind the China shipyard, they stay behind the Korean shipyard, the Japanese, and that's, I think, the major problem, not only for the shipyard here in Croatia. That will be the major problem, although also to stay alive for the old shipyard in Europe.
In 10 years, the Rijeka site has lost half of its workforce. A further 300 of the 2,000 remaining employees will also be laid off. Workers feel they've been sacrificed by Croatia's government for its entry into the EU. These unpopular measures are likely to be put forward in the accession referendum, which may take place alongside parliamentary elections in December.
Well, I am now in the Croatian capital, Zagreb, to meet our first guest in the program, the President of the Republic of Croatia, Mr. Ivo Josipovic. Mr. Josipovic, thank you for having us here at your office in the center of Zagreb. During the election campaign in 2010, you vowed to secure EU membership. It's now a done deal. I guess you must be a happy man.
I'm a happy man, and we have to thank to everyone who participated, especially the government and the other officials who participated in the efforts. Opposition as well, because opposition was also part of our EU efforts. But in spite, I'm very happy about our EU membership. I'm aware that we have to continue with our reforms because, in my view, Croatia should be a typical European country with a good economy in due time. That means about 2020. I expect that our institution will function as efficient as in all other European countries. And of course, our judiciary is going to be better and better.
And despite the good news, Euroscepticism has been rising in your country. That's according to several polls. Why is that? Does that worry you?
Specifically, after closing negotiations, our Euroscepticism is falling. So we started our negotiation process with support that was very high for EU. Then it was one period in which our support of our citizens declined. It was especially after a very long period of negotiations for us. We expected that it will be quicker. Our citizens expected that it will be quicker. And so economical crisis was there, some Hague issues also was worrying here our citizens, and the result was weakening the support. But now the support is very good. It's now rising, and it's about nearly 60%.
Mr. Josipovic, I'd like to talk about the case of Ivo Sanader, the former Croatian Prime Minister, who's awaiting trial on charges of abuse of office and corruption. Now that Austria, the country where he was originally arrested, has agreed to extradite him to Croatia, what do you think should happen?
What I always stressed, rule of law means that no one from executive will interfere in the process, but also independence and fair trial is something that's expected for everyone, including former Prime Minister Mr. Sanader. So I'm asking every politician not to interfere, and I also hope and I'm convinced that the fair trial will be happening towards Mr. Sanader.
Former Croatian General Ante Gotovina was convicted of atrocities by the Hague Tribunal in April. He will spend 24 years in jail. I know this is a polarizing issue in your country because many Croatians still regard him as a hero. Do you regard him as a hero?
He was a very distinguished fighter, definitely. What I have to stress that in spite do we like the verdict or not, Croatia is part of international judicial system. Croatia must obey to the verdicts of the ICTY, and we are going to see what will be the final verdict because it's now in appeal process. Part of my policy is reconciliation. That means also ability and capability of the states and nations to reconsider history and to recognize what was good and what was bad in their policies during past years.
Ivo Josipovic, President of the Republic of Croatia, thank you very much. In In Croatia, some of the staunchest opponents of the country's EU membership are to be found in nationalist circles. They say Brussels forced Zagreb to deliver to the Hague Tribunal military leaders whom they still regard as heroes and liberators. In April, they demonstrated after former General Ante Gotovina was sentenced to 24 years imprisonment for the crimes committed by his troops during the so-called Operation Storm. But on July 20th, Croatians celebrated the arrest in Serbia of Goran Hadžić. In the early 90s, he ruled the self-proclaimed Serb entity within Croatia, the so-called Krajina Republic.
Croatia's #1 enemy is behind bars. After 7 years on the run, the Serb Goran Hadžić was arrested in mid-July and is being held at The Hague. He's the last of 161 defendants to face trial at the International Criminal Tribunal for former Yugoslavia.
The arrest of Goran Hadžić is good news for the whole world. But first of all, it's good news for Croats. He was one of the men who worked hardest at realizing the political ideas of Slobodan Milosevic, ideas of Great Serbia.
Between 1991 and 95, Hadžić was the self-proclaimed president of the Republic of Krajina, a Serb enclave in Croatia. He's now facing 14 charges, including war crimes and crimes against humanity. He's accused of killing hundreds of Croatian civilians and orchestrating the Vukovar massacre.
Of course, we are pleased that Hadžić was arrested, but I think it's a political move because Serbia needs to join the European Union.
Croatians celebrated the arrest, but their past isn't whiter than white. They too had to hand over war criminals in order to please Brussels. In 2005, they delivered General Ante Gotovina, the very man who seized Krajina from Hadžić in 1995. The former legionnaire, considered a hero by many Croats, was sentenced last April for the persecution and murder of Serbian civilians in Krajina.
For having committed these crimes, the chamber sentences you, Mr. Gotovina, to a single sentence of 24 years of imprisonment.
The sentence led to an outcry in Croatia, where many people still want Serbia to be viewed as responsible for the Yugoslav wars.
I am now inside Diocletian's palace, the landmark of Split, some of the best preserved Roman ruins in the world. But in the next story, we'll take a course of linguistics. Under the communist regime of Tito, Serbians and Croatians were officially speaking Serbo-Croatian. But with the fall of Yugoslavia, the declarations of independence and the process of nation building, the languages were recodified by Zagreb and Belgrade. To what extent is Croatian different from Serbian? Are there even different languages? Well, Valérie Labonne finds out for us.
This site is in Istria on the Adriatic coast. It's home to a site that holds a special place in Croatian history and the heart of Mate Maras, a renowned Croatian translator. These pillars represent letters of the Glagolitic alphabet, the oldest known Slavic alphabet which formed the building blocks of the Slavic Church and Croatia's first written language.
The Croatian language was born here. In 1200 AD, they published a Glagoliotic alphabet book and people learned how to read and write in the Croat language.
Maras is keen to promote the Croatian language as a language in its own right. For several months, the issue has divided the intellectual community, who are arguing over whether Croatian and Serbian are the same language. The linguist Snježana Kordić believes they are and presents the case in her book Language and Nationalism, a bestseller that split Croatian opinion. Unsurprisingly, Maras is a strong opponent of the book, calling Kordić's theory provocative.
The problem here is that we have always called our language Croatian, and we don't want to call it anything else. In the same way that Serbs have always called their language Serbian, it's a political issue. They want to impose uniformity when it's no longer possible to do so.
It's an opinion shared by Croatian nationalists who see the book as part of a plot by Europe to weaken Croatia's independence and identity. Some even went as far as filing a complaint against the Ministry of Culture for funding the book.
The Ministry of Culture should never have subsidized this kind of work. In this book, it states the Croatian language does not exist. This is an unconstitutional act because the Constitution clearly states that Croatian is the official language of Croatia.
According to Snježana Kordić and her supporters, national boundaries don't always fit perfectly with linguistic boundaries. As proof, Serbs and Croats don't need a translator to understand each other, as in many countries of former Yugoslavia. In their view, the battle to define the Croatian language is a result of nationalists campaigning since 1991, the year of Croatian independence.
It's just obvious. It's the same language, in few variations. And that's that. Everything else is just a mystification. Mystification for some very, let's say, dirty purposes, and with some quite bloody consequences.
Since the end of the war that killed 20,000 people, Croatians have struggled to reconstruct a battered national identity. One of the ways to do this is through language. The Academy of Arts and Letters agree Croatian and Serbian languages share the same root, but the crucial difference is they're built from two unique cultures.
Croatia has always belonged to Central Europe and especially the Mediterranean. On the other hand, Serbia belonged to the world of Orthodox Europe, Eastern Europe. Serbia's culture is very rich and interesting, but very different from Croatia's. And that's reflected in our language.
One thing might finally put all the disagreements to bed. When Croatia joins the EU in July 2013, its language will be recognised as the 24th official language of the European Union.
Well, it's already the end of the first part of Europe District from Split, Dalmatia, but we'll return after the news break in about 10 minutes. We'll continue our journey through Croatia, so please stay with us on France 24.